So we have this huge dimensional space, and we use principal component analysis to reduce it down, and then we can normalize it using the averages for the particular person we're looking at, and then identify which of these various categories is being shown using various techniques. We can work out which muscles are moving in the face. These muscles give us information about both the categories and also a continuous measure of one's valence, going from something that's upsetting, sad, to something that's happy, and arousal from passive to active. And it's a complicated system, there are a lot of phases to it. We start with the video, we use this histogram of oriented gradients, and then from that we work out the muscle actions, and from the muscle actions we can work out both the continuous measures and the discrete measures. And if we want to see that system in operation, it looks something like this. The person in this picture is Tadas Baltrushaitis. One of my research students, he actually built the face tracker and then plugged it into the rest of the system. So at the big picture, you see the image from the face tracker. It's the yellow dots are the feature points we're following. The green box shows the orientation of the head, which is inferred from the geometry of the feature points. And then at the bottom, you see the normalized image. You see it broken down into this 10 by 10 grid with the histograms of oriented gradients, and then the slightly abstract mechanism that works out action units. And those are the bars you see across the bottom. They're showing the strength of various muscle movements in the face. So the first one's raising the brow, second one's smiling, and so on. So when he smiles, you see the smile shoots up, and the third one's actually lips apart. And that's also useful. From those, we can then infer the valence and arousal. Valence, remember, going from negative to positive feelings, and arousal from passive to active, and we can see it shooting around, and also the discrete categories. So that's quite a useful tool. We can actually monitor someone's face. It's completely non-invasive. It generalizes to any people. It is self-initiating. It finds the face automatically. It normalizes for the amount of activity in that person's face. And this is a system that's available on GitHub. It's used by thousands of universities and research labs around the world. Well, that's one channel of communication, but actually the face is interesting. Of course, the voice is interesting as well. And by voice, I mean not what we're saying, but how we're saying it. And we need to measure things like the energy in the voice, how loud it is, the tempo, how fast it is, the pitch, up and down. And there's a slightly different way you can analyze that. There isn't anything easy like the muscles in the face that you can monitor in order to work out how somebody is saying something. But there are lots of measures that you can get: pitch, energy, tempo, and these in different frequency bands. And you can see we worked out a total of about 170 metrics that you can compute just by doing a bit of digital signal processing on the voice input. The trouble is, you can't just take those metrics and infer a mental state, an emotion, a person's feelings from them. But it turns out that what you can do is, if you have two conditions that you wish to distinguish, say anger and boredom, then there'll just be two or three of those metrics that you can use to decide whether it's anger or boredom. And if you've got two different conditions, say anger and confusion, well, there'll be two or three different metrics that separate those. And if it's boredom and confusion, 2 or 3 metrics again. But so we can do a comparison between 2 conditions using 2 or 3 of these 170 metrics. Well, you do a sort of data mining operation to work out which metrics are the right ones to separate each pair, and you then have and B is preferred to C and both A is preferred to C, and then you can rank their probabilities. Of course, you might get cycles, but anyway, you've got all of these. If you've got n different conditions that you're looking for, you have a half n times n minus 1 pairs that you have to do, and you can then combine those using some sort of voting system. The voting system might look for a single winner, or it might look for multiple winners. And of course, it's the case that we often express more than one mental state at once. So actually looking for multiple winners is no bad thing. And that's a system that works quite effectively. It turns out that it also, like facial expression, generalizes very well from training data to the general population. And interestingly, it even generalizes across languages, or at least European languages. We trained it on English data and tested it on Israeli, and it turned out that it could pick out the emotions reasonably well. So that's another tool that we have at our disposal for measuring somebody's mental states non-invasively, just by listening to their voice, not what they're saying, but how they're saying it, and that gives us clues. And it turns out that actually the face is a very good indicator of valence, negative to positive, and the voice a very good indicator of arousal from passive to active. So combining the two gives you quite a good measure. But there are other ways that we show our emotions. Body posture and gesture are important. So, for example, if you look at these pictures of some tennis players, you can see from their facial expressions that there's something pretty extreme going on, and I'm not quite sure what it is. But if we look at the rest of the pictures, we see that the first 2 are defeat, sort of low valence, and the second 2 are actually success, high valence, and it's expressed through the body posture, slumping for sadness, upright for success, and also the gesture, the clenched fist or the open palm. So that's another interesting channel, and we looked into trying to see if we could automate analysis of human movements. And some colleagues in the University of Glasgow had collected a database of videos using a motion capture system of people doing 4 different everyday movements. So knocking on a door, which is what you see here, lifting something, throwing something, and walking. And they did it in 4 different ways: a sort of a neutral emotion, an angry emotion, a happy emotion, and a sad emotion. And they recorded video for 30 subjects who did 2 of each of these 4 emotions for 4 activities. So 30 people recording 32 videos each, so about 900 bits of video. And here you see at the top there's somebody knocking, and they're doing it in an angry way. You can see there's a lot of energy in it, and the one at the bottom is knocking, but in a sad way. It's a bit timid. So there is something there, and the question is, can we analyze it? Well, it turns out if you just look at the dynamics of angle joints, and we can work out from those things like energy in all of the joints and also of the overall body. And we thought, fine, we've got all of these multidimensional space. We know what to do with that. Principal component analysis, find out which ones matter. And what we found out was it wasn't that easy. What this told us was what the person was doing. It's not altogether surprising, really. If you measure the angles of the joints, you find out that this person's knocking and that person's lifting. So what we had to do was to find a way to factor out the underlying action and just look at the way that that action was being done. And the way that you do that is by breaking up the motion into little separate segments, call them kinemes, sort of like phonemes in speech, and the kinemes are separated by zero energy patches. So if you're knocking, there's a movement as you raise your hand, but then a zero energy bit, and then you strike, pause, retract, pause, strike, pause, retract, pause, and eventually put the hand down. So we've got all of these little motion pieces, and we can analyze each of those and see how each of those is being done. The trouble is, that just tells you who's doing it. It turns out that this is not as general as face and voice. Different people have just general levels of different activity. And so this system, you have to train on an individual for it to be useful. And in some contexts that might be useful, but we were trying to look for systems that generalized across the population and were non-invasive. So this is using model tracking technology, non-invasive, but it is something you have to retrain the system on each individual. And they have a personal motion signature, and you can then look for the variations. Now, of course, this is all machine learning. The face, the voice, the body posture and gesture, all rely on machine learning. And for that, we need lots of training data. And we've been trying to work out how best to collect it. A lot of it was collected through acted. So the videos that we used for training were acted, the voice was acted, the body movements were acted. We wanted to try and collect data in the wild. Heard about a challenging problem. And we were particularly interested in car drivers. So we did some experiments with car drivers. We got 50 people to drive around a test route that we'd set up, about an hour to drive around, a bit of city driving, a bit of country driving, and a bit of motorway driving. And here you see some of the videos re-recorded, and you'll see our face tracker works quite well. It even actually works at night because it can work with the infrared signal. And what we discovered, having collected 50 hours of video and looked at it, we then went through it to label it. Most of the time they were bored. And just occasionally, the car that we were using, we'd also instrumented with outward-facing cameras, so we could see the environment. We had lots of telemetry connected to the controls in the car. We had GPS, so we knew where it was and how fast it was going. And using all that information, essentially, most of the time, they weren't showing any emotions, and just occasionally something interesting happened, but it was almost always to do with other traffic on the road. And that's not very good for data collection because we couldn't repeat the experiments. What we really wanted was extreme trials where they had accidents, but it's quite hard to get ethical approval to send drivers out onto the public roads to have an accident. So we decided to try and record it in the laboratory, and we heard about this earlier. We set up a simulator. We have a driving simulator where, of course, we can instrument the person as much as we like, and we can change the conditions in which they're driving. So we can control the other traffic in the simulator. We can control the weather conditions. We can even stress the driver by making them do mental arithmetic at the same time as they're driving. And this proved much more successful. We could do repeatable experiments with different drivers, but it turned out they didn't care if they had an accident. They just laughed it off, pressed the reset button and carried on. And so we didn't have the same sort of genuine emotional engagement with the game, with the driving. And so the results that we were getting weren't terribly interesting. So we thought of it and then decided, we can do better than that. We can make this rather more competitive, rather more stimulating, emotionally engaging. And so we moved from a pure simulator to a remote control device. What we did was got some off-the-shelf drones. These are ones that you normally just control as a toy from your mobile phone. We reprogrammed them so that they ran on our laboratory infrastructure network, and we could control them from our driving simulator. So again, the participant in the is getting video sent back from the remote control device, but they control it remotely. But we can monitor them and we can stress them, we can make them do mental arithmetic. And this is much more emotionally engaging. It's also much more fun. I mean, if you've got these, you can fly them all around the department and fly into people's offices and wave at them and so on. But the scientific point is we can monitor the person who's driving it, who's seeing a view from the drone as it goes around the building. And that turns out to be emotionally engaging. When we give them mental arithmetic to do and they have a crash, they actually respond because somebody has to go out, pick it up, and set the thing going again. So that was a more interesting. And actually, we can see measurable differences. We were using for this the person's heart rate and their skin conductivity as the two measures. Your heart tends to go faster when you're aroused. Your skin conductivity tends to increase when you sweat because you're being stressed. So, slightly complicated set of results here. What you see are two different pictures. The left-hand experiments of the driving simulator, the right-hand side of the remote control. At the bottom of each, we've got heart rate figures, and at the top, we've got skin conductivity figures. And then within each box, we've got the straightforward driving and the driving while doing mental arithmetic. And what we see is for the driving simulator, there's essentially no difference between the responses of different participants, whether they're doing the easy task or the hard task. But with the remote control, we see statistically significant differences between both the heart rate and the skin conductivity as they move to the harder experiment. And so this is interesting. It means that we can actually see that the people are invested in what's going on with the remote control in a way that they weren't with the pure simulation. And so that's actually quite a useful way of telling us how we need to collect data. We didn't really need to send drivers out onto the road. That's not very useful. Even a driving simulator is not useful, but a practical task under laboratory conditions is going to give you much better results. Well, these are ways that we can monitor people and collect data about them. What are ways that the computer could improve its communication with the user? And we became interested in the possibility of having computers that had some degree of emotional engagement. So not just text on a screen or even voice synthesis or even cartoons. We did some work with cartoons. But what about real live robots? And there you see another one of my research students, Laurel Gregg, now a professor in California, with a Now robot that's very popular. Now, the Now robot is a very curious thing. This is a little robot. They're very popular, mainly because they're cheap. They only cost a few $1,000s. And it's about, as you see, about 60 centimeters tall. It's got 25 degrees of freedom, the motors in it. It's got cameras and microphones, ultrasound ranging. And they're very popular for doing robotic experiments, particularly for interaction experiments. And it's a very curious thing. When people meet them, they immediately anthropomorphize. They think they're people. I think it's funny because it looks like a small child. So it's sort of rather engaging, and that people get an emotional response to interactions with these bits of plastic, which is really odd because these bits of plastic have no emotional expression at all. Their faces are actually hard plastic. They just have light emitting diodes for the eyes. You can't really tell the expression that it's showing, and yet people think that it's showing emotions. They actually imbue it with emotions, even though it patently has none. And we wondered, how realistic does a robot have to be before it actually does something? Well, the answer is this wasn't terribly useful, but we did some experiments with a robotic chimpanzee. It's actually meant for karaoke. You sing, and it's got 6 motors that move the face correspondingly. Well, we reprogrammed it so that we could make it interact with someone, and people came and had a conversation with it. Now, obviously, it's not a human, and obviously, it's not even a live monkey, but when we made it do random movements, they perceived it as being less responsive, paying less attention to them than when it copied whatever they were doing. So we could point a camera at the human participant and play back their facial movements on this robot, and that actually changed their perception of it. They actually thought it was paying attention. That's rather curious, but never mind, it's interesting. It means that if you actually have a device with some sort of controlled response, not a random response, but a controlled response, it'll be well received. So the question was, well, how realistic does it have to be? So we did another experiment where we put some video clips on the internet of robots being abused. And they went from a robotic vacuum cleaner, Roomba, through this desk lamp, which looks human. It looks like it's got an eye. People react to that eye through a humanoid automaton to an android, slightly more realistic automaton to a real human actor. And there was a clear greater degree of empathy the more human they looked. So we thought, well, I wonder how human it does have to look. So we commissioned a robotic head from a man called David Hanson in Texas, who makes robots for the Disney Corporation. And he made for us this head with about 30 motors inside it that replicate the muscles in the face, and then covered it with very good prosthetics. And we dressed it up. And as you can see, its face is extraordinarily expressive. For a still picture, these are really very expressive. You might find it hard to say that that was, just a robot rather than a person. So it has a very expressive face, particularly when we dress it up with a wig. It's actually modeled on Charles Babbage, the computer pioneer, incidentally. And so the question then was, do people understand the emotions in this that we can express? Because of course we can replay into this all of the things that we've learned for our various analyses. So we did an experiment. We got some video clips and ran our face tracker on them, and then we produced a cartoon image that just showed the feature points that the face tracker was tracking. We used that to animate a cartoon avatar, which is the bearded man, and also to animate our robot. And we played different emotional expressions and looked to see how well they would be recognized. And of course, our assumption was that the more realistic it was, the easier it would be, the higher recognition rate we would get. Turned out to be precisely wrong. Needless to say, the actor has the highest recognition rate. The stick figure, just the feature points, had the second highest recognition rate. Cartoon, not as good as that, and the robot worst of all. So the robot was very expensive, cost about $50,000 and completely useless. It turns out that it cannot express emotions. And that's interesting. We tried to work out why, and actually it was very easy. When we did experiments with people looking at the robot, they said it was creepy. And the reason they think it's creepy is although the still expressions are extremely good, we could never manage to get the movements right. And if the movements are wrong, people are very good at noticing anomalous movements in someone's face. It shows that they're ill in some way, and so they've probably eaten something dangerous, and so you want to keep away from them. So, and it turns out if you've got a robot like that, well, it may not be any use for science, but it's really good for publicity. It turns out that the press love robots, and robots that can pull facial expressions are great. So actually, my research students and postdocs all got very good at doing television interviews. So it was very good transferable skills training, but probably rather an expensive way of doing it. And one of the best press interviews we did was an invitation to appear on a Spanish television show called El Miguel. Well, this is a program that goes out 4 days a week, 40 minutes, and is essentially a popular chat show. But they have a 5-minute science section in the middle, I'm delighted to say, and they were running short of things to do, so they invited us to go over with our robot. And here you can see it moving, you can see just how creepy it is. And what we've done is we're running a program that we have a camera pointed at my face, and it's just emulating whatever I do. And I've got rid of the soundtrack. What you can't hear, this program, by the way, goes out live with a studio audience. And my team said to me, so you're going to take an experimental face tracker and an unreliable robot on live television. What could possibly go wrong? I said, it's Spain, nobody will know. In fact, it worked well, and the audience was immensely impressed. Here you see the host of the program. I have huge respect for the people who host live television shows. In about 3 minutes rehearsal in the afternoon, he learned that what he had to do was very slow, very exaggerated movements, and then it would look good. And so he duly did slow, exaggerated movements. It looks staggeringly good, hyper-realistic, as they said in the captions, and the audience all went ooh and ah. And my colleague Ian Davis and I standing there thinking, this is absolute rubbish. But people like it. And that actually tells us something about people. People want to believe that these things work. And if you have a robot, they really want to believe that robots are alive, are human. And well, there we are. The thing is, get a good person to do your demonstration for you. Oh, well, this is vaguely interesting. It turns out that not all of the servos fitted inside the head, so there are some strapped on a backpack, but you can sort of see the way that it's being animated there. So actually, maybe robots aren't such a good idea, but this had a funny side effect. It meant I became known as an expert on robots, and I'm not an expert on robots at all, but I would get calls from the press asking about the latest panic about robots becoming sentient, being about to take over the world. And we see lots of headlines like this. My colleague Stephen Hawking was always very keen to say that AI is dangerous, particularly this sort of thing. And Stephen, very clever man, but he did like publicity, and you get much more publicity if you say we're all doomed than if you say, I don't think it's a problem, you should just pull the plug out. But anyway, that's another matter. And it's interesting, when you talk about robots, people always think about them as being humanoid, looking like people, and quite possibly if they become sentient, they'll be malicious. And this is a theme that's run through fiction forever, from the Jewish Golem mythologies through Mary Shelley's Frankenstein in the early 19th century to Carol Karel Čapek's novel Rossum's Universal Robots in the early 20th century. The picture at the bottom right there is interesting. It's a Rossum's Universal Robots. This was the word that introduced the word robot to mean a humanoid automaton. He was a Czech playwright, and they had robot policemen in Prague. A robot policeman just meant a traffic signal, which actually in those days was a mechanical arm that went up and down. And Čapek used the word to describe these humanoid automata, and actually the play describes how they became sentient and turned on their masters. And there you see one of the robots beating Rossum to death. But that's, of course, been true in films forever. It's Metropolis, which also came out in the 1920s. The I, Robot books by Asimov, and of course the Stanley Kubrick film based on Arthur C. Clarke's novel 2001, where there's a robot in the spaceship that sets about killing off all crew. But of course, robots aren't like that. It's interesting that the Kubrick had a robot that didn't look like a person. It was just a light on a camera. And incidentally, a camera that would read emotions, interesting, in a film that was made 50 years ago. But otherwise, they always look like humans. But of course, most robots don't look like humans. They're doing things like automation in factories, either heavy work making cars, or very precise work, making integrated circuits, or assisting with surgery. And yet, people always think of robots as humanoid. I think it's because we see them as being in our image, but they're not a good image. I have one of the best robots going, and it's nowhere like a person. They, of course, have no relationships. People think they're human, but they're not. They're just simulations, and there's a difficulty distinguishing simulations from the real thing. They can recognize emotions and even display them, but that's not the same as having empathy. And of course, they're completely non-spiritual. So what's going on here is there's a confusion, and it seems to be that people have this. If you like, the idea of modernism was that we could explain humans as intelligent machines. So in the Industrial Revolution, they sort of thought of people as being glorified steam engines. And now in the computer age, we think of people as being glorified computers. And that's one way of doing things. And the other thing is we try and anthropomorphize machines. So we actually think that the machines have human characteristics, which they don't have. And these are two big problems, that we try and understand the machine ourselves as if we're machines, but we're not, we're much more. And we try and understand machines as if they were people, but they're not, they're machines. And actually, a much more intelligent view of what constitutes a robot was given by Vint Cerf, man who was one of the creators of the internet, who said that anything that takes input and produces an output that has an effect on the real world should be considered as a robot. It's a much broader definition. And so that includes things like self-driving cars. It includes things like fly-by-wire aeroplanes. It includes things like automatic stock trading systems. Not to mention all the other gadgets that we have, but these are interesting because these are all ones that potentially give rise to difficulty. Self-driving cars actually seem to be generally safer than human drivers, but fly-by-wire aeroplanes, we've seen problems with Boeing, dare I say it, and with stock market trading systems, automatic systems, undoubtedly exacerbated the 2008 stock market crash because they were badly written bits of software. Boeing have had problems with the 737 MAX because it was badly written software, not so much that there were errors in the software engineering, but there were errors of management in cutting costs. So these are the real robots, and they are a problem. And of course, the real systems are the ones that we don't see at all, that are built into an awful lot of what we do, which is anything to do with social media. We sort of think of social media as a pleasant way to keep in touch with people. That's a nonsense. The companies that provide them don't charge. And so if they don't charge, you're the product. And of course, what they want to do is to show you advertising, which they can charge their clients for. So it's all about advertising. It's about engagement. They want to understand what you like, so you'll continue watching more and more of it, and they can show you more and more advertisements. And incidentally, they want to know about your friends, so they harvest your address books, the people you're in touch with, just the metadata from communications, who you communicate with. There are other people who probably have similar interests. Show them the same material, and you will get more audience. So these social media are actually a very dangerous piece of robotic intelligence, artificial intelligence. That's using very high-powered machine learning to analyze your characteristics so they can understand what would appeal to you. And of course, that has all sorts of damaging effects. The echo chamber that we get in politics, you only get comments that agree with things that you've said before, because that way you'll watch more of it. Young people look to this for likes as affirmation and approval. And if there's one thing I would say to young people about social media, or indeed to adults as well, is never ever use it. I don't have any social media accounts. A lot of my colleagues don't either. We just see it as a very dangerous phenomenon, but it is nevertheless there. So perhaps we ought to just wonder, is there an existential threat from artificial intelligence? Well, it's not the robots becoming sentient and exterminating us, but there are real risks with all of these systems. We lose human skills when we rely on automatic systems too much. A lot of people now wouldn't know how to read a paper map, for example. The systems we're now understanding have huge bias in their training, because the training data is typically Western civilizations, and it's often data harvested from people of a particular group that perhaps have been used for employment, and you employ more people like them. There is that bias. It's been used for disinformation. We've seen that last year, where there was information targeted to individual electors through social medias, which related to their known prejudices, which had been analysed, and so you could then send them an advertisement that would pander to that and tell them that a particular candidate would solve it. And indeed, they're being used for direct social control. The fact that we all carry mobile phones, that our communications are not being monitored in most countries, but are in some, all of these activities actually give the state huge power to monitor what the population are doing. And even if they're not, people are nervous that they might, and so they censor themselves. So it's either state censorship or self-censorship, both of which are dangerous. And of course, there's the whole field of autonomous weapons, which are proving very popular with the military because they're so cheap, but they are not proving terribly good. But if you have a fighter pilot, they are trained to a degree level, they understand the legal requirements of combat and of engagement in war. A lot of the autonomous weapons don't have that degree of subtlety. So is there an ethical problem here? Now, this is really what I want to finish with, and I've spoken probably for far too long anyway. What we see are that when people interact with machines, they don't understand that they're not having a relationship with it. And they can't understand there's a difference between a simulated relationship on a machine and a real relationship with another person. As I said, called sensors and servos, it's not sentient. And thinking that imputing machines with personhood, thinking of them as people, is a really bad idea. And actually, it comes down to what are humans for on the planet? Partly it's to have relationships, but also it's to rule. And actually, there are just clear ethical issues here. And they're the ethics that are common to any profession. Professions are well paid because their practitioners are well trained, and they're well paid because they take personal responsibility for what they're doing. And if we look at the way that computers are being used, we see that there are, in some occasions, incompetence because there simply aren't enough trained people. And we saw that in the stock market automatic trading systems. They were built by people who didn't understand what a positive feedback really was. That's what exacerbated the crash. And then you get people, possibly more dangerous, who are extremely competent, but whose motivation is purely to make money. That probably brings us to the social media. So I suppose my message is that actually what we need is more professionalism in computing. And I fear it may be too late. It's probably a game that's lost. But anyway, I'll stop there and take questions. I'll just mention that all of this work I've described is actually not my work. It's the work of a huge number of very clever research students and postdocs, about half of whom are shown here, about 50, I guess, I've worked with over the years, from all around the world, who are really incredibly clever people and do all these wonderful experiments and are actually rather good programmers, and many of them now in universities. Though he didn't work on this work, so I'm afraid his picture's not in that gallery, and others who are in industry taking it forward there. But anyway, I'll stop there and take questions. Thank you. Is there more in it?